trembling hands grip a shepherd's staff at the bronze gates of Jerusalem's palace. A solitary figure stands before guards who tower above him, their spears catching the first light of dawn. The prophet's eyes, steady, burning, remain fixed on the cedar doors behind which a king hides. His breath clouds the morning air. A single bead of sweat traces his temple despite the cold. Inside those walls, the most powerful man in Israel sleeps beside a woman who is not his wife. Her husband lies buried in foreign soil, placed on the front lines of battle by royal command. The city whispers, the elders know, but no one dares speak except this man, this shepherd, this prophet named Nathan. What words could make the most powerful king in Israel fall to his knees? How does a simple shepherd confront the man who killed Goliath, who united a fractured nation, who commands armies with a single word? What truth is so dangerous it could topple a throne or save a nation? In the next 80 minutes you'll discover how one man's courage to speak an impossible truth revealed the heart of God's justice, and how that same truth can expose the hidden places in your own life where mercy and accountability collide. If you want to see how this unfolds, subscribe and turn on the bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Nightfall 3 weeks earlier. Nathan kneels in his modest dwelling on the outskirts of Jerusalem, hands blackened by charcoal as he sketches sheep on parchment. The simple home smells of oil lamps and worn leather. Outside, the city settles into its evening rhythm. Merchants closing their stalls, mothers calling children inside. The temple choirs last him echoing across stone walls. He's documenting the flocks he tends, noting which youths are pregnant, which rams show signs of illness. It's meticulous work, the kind that requires concentration, but tonight concentration eludes him. His hand pauses mid. The charcoal hovers above the parchment. Something feels wrong, not in his home, in the city, in the very air. Suddenly, a wind extinguishes every lamp in the room. Not a natural breeze through the window, those are shuttered tight against the night chill. This wind comes from nowhere and everywhere at once. Nathan remains motionless in the absolute darkness, his breath shallow, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then the voice, not audible in the way human voices are audible, but more real than any sound his ears have ever processed. It fills the room, fills his chest, fills the hollow places in his bones. Go to David, 2 words. Simple, impossible to misunderstand, impossible to obey. Nathan's hands begin to shake. The charcoal falls from his fingers, clatters on the floor. He wants to respond, wants to ask why, wants to ask how, but his throat is closed. The darkness presses in. The silence after the voice is somehow louder than the voice itself. Minutes pass or hours. Time loses meaning when God speaks. Eventually, his wife Ada relights a lamp. Her hands are steadier than his. She's seen him like this before, struck silent by divine encounter, trembling like a man with fever. She doesn't ask questions. She simply places bread and water beside him and withdraws to give him space. Nathan doesn't touch the food. He sits in the flickering lamplight, staring at nothing, replaying those 2 words. Go to David, the king, the anointed one, the man who dances before the ark with abandon, who writes psalms that make grown men weep, who turned a shepherd's sling into a legend. But Nathan knows what the rest of Jerusalem is only beginning to whisper about. It started 2 months ago. Nathan heard it first in the marketplace from a vendor who sold pottery near the palace. The woman spoke in careful tones, glancing over her shoulder. The king, she'd said, has taken an interest in Uriah's wife. Nathan had dismissed it. Kings notice beautiful women. It means nothing. Then came the second rumor, a week later, from one of the temple servants. Bathsheba has been seen entering the palace in the evening alone. Nathan's stomach had tightened, but he'd pushed the unease away. Perhaps she was delivering a message from her husband, who served in David's elite forces. Perhaps there was a reasonable explanation. The third rumor arrived like a stone through a window, shattering any possibility of innocent interpretation. A soldier returning from the front lines, drunk on too much wine and too much grief. Uriah the Hittite. The man had slurred, placed in the front ranks at Robar, the king's order. The Ammonites cut him down in minutes. And then, before the mourning period had even properly concluded, the announcement: David had married Bathsheba, taken her into the palace, made her a queen. The timing, the convenience, the dead husband, and the living king. Nathan sits in his dwelling now, the oil lamp casting dancing shadows on the walls, and understands with terrible clarity why God has spoken. The whispers are true, all of them, and somehow, impossibly, he is being sent to confront it. He rises on unsteady legs and moves to the small chest where he keeps the sacred scrolls. His fingers still trembling, unroll the Torah. He doesn't need to search long. The words leap off the parchment as though written in fire. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder. 3 commandments carved in stone on Sinai, given to Moses, binding on every Israelite from the lowest servant to the highest king. No exceptions. No royal exemptions. Nathan's eyes blur. He closes them, presses his forehead against the cool parchment. In the darkness behind his eyelids, the voice returns quieter this time, but no less absolute. I anointed him. I took him from the sheep pens and made him king over my people. I gave him everything, and he has despised me. The word despised lands like a physical blow. Nathan gasps. God doesn't use such language lightly. This isn't disappointment. This is betrayal. the kind that fractures covenants and topples kingdoms. What do I say to him? Nathan whispers into the empty room. How do I tell a king he's broken faith with the Almighty? No answer comes. Only the weight of the assignment pressing down on his shoulders like a yoke meant for oxen. He rolls up the scroll with careful hands, returns it to the chest. When he straightens, Ada is standing in the doorway. Her face tells him she's been there for some time, watching, waiting. You're going to the palace, she says, not a question. I am. They'll kill you. Nathan looks at his wife, this woman who has stood beside him through 20 years of prophetic ministry, who has fed the other prophets when they arrived hungry at their door, who has never once asked him to choose safety over obedience. Then I die speaking, he says. Her eyes fill, but she doesn't argue. She simply crosses the room, takes his face in her hands, and kisses his forehead. May the Lord make his face shine upon you, she whispers. Nathan pulls on his outer cloak, the rough wool that marks him as a man of modest means. He takes up his staff, the same one he's carried since his own days as a shepherd, gnarled and worn smooth by decades of use. At the door, he pauses. If I don't return by morning, he says without turning around, go to the prophet Gad. He'll know what to do. Then he steps out into the night. The streets of Jerusalem are nearly empty at this hour. Only the night watchmen patrol, calling out the time and the all clear. Nathan keeps to the shadows, his sandals silent on the stone. The closer he gets to the palace district, the more his chest constricts. The palace rises against the night sky like a mountain of cut stone and cedar. Torches burn along the walls. Guards stand at intervals, vigilant. This is the house that David built, the seat of his power, the symbol of God's blessing on Israel. And inside, a king sleeps, believing himself untouchable. Nathan stops at the base of the hill, looking up at the bronze gates. They loom larger than he remembered, flanked by guards whose armor gleams in the torchlight. His hands tighten on the staff. Every instinct screams at him to turn back, to let someone else deliver this message, to find a way to make this God's problem instead of his. But the voice echoes in his memory. Go to David. He takes a breath, then another. His right foot moves forward, then his left. Step by step, he climbs toward the gates, toward the guards, toward the impossible task of telling the most powerful man in Israel that he has become the villain of his own story. The guards see him coming. Their hands move to their weapons. One calls out, "Halt, state your business." Nathan's throat is dry as dust, but he forces the words out. I am Nathan the prophet. I have come with a word from the Lord for King David. The guards exchange glances. One of them, a man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, steps forward. His lips curl into something that might be a smile or a sneer. It's hard to tell in the torchlight. Shepherd prophet, he says, loud enough for the other guards to hear. Laughter ripples through their ranks. Come to bless the king's new bride. Have you? Nathan stands still, refusing to react. He's learned over the years that responding to mockery only feeds it. The staff in his hand feels suddenly heavy, as though weighted with all the words he's been commanded to speak. The scarred guard circles him slowly, appraising, prophet. The king has been quite busy lately. New wife, new child on the way, they say. Perhaps he doesn't have time for shepherds bearing messages about sheep and weather. More laughter. Nathan's knuckles whiten against the wood of his staff, but his face remains impassive. He waits. I request an audience with the king, Nathan says, his voice steady, despite the hammering of his heart. I have urgent business. The guard stops circling, plants himself directly in Nathan's path. Urgent business. He draws out the words, mocking. The king doesn't see beggars. Prophet, even beggars who claim to speak for God, come back during public audience hours. If you're lucky, you might get 3 minutes before he has you removed. This cannot wait. Everything can wait. The guard's hand rests on his sword hilt now, the gesture casual but unmistakable. Go home, old man, tend your sheep, leave the king to his business. Nathan holds the guard's gaze for a long moment. He sees no malice there, not really, just a man doing his job, protecting his king, maintaining order. The guard doesn't know what Nathan knows, doesn't carry what Nathan carries. Tell him I came, Nathan says finally. Tell him the prophet Nathan seeks audience on a matter of the law. He turns and walks away before the guards can respond, descending the hill with measured steps. He can feel their eyes on his back, can hear their renewed laughter fading behind him. The word law probably sounded quaint to them, archaic, as if kings concern themselves with the same rules that bind common men. But Nathan has delivered his message to the gate. He's made his presence known, and now he must wait. He doesn't return home. Instead, his feet carry him east out of the sleeping city toward the Mount of Olives. It's a climb he's made 100 times, usually in daylight, usually with a specific destination in mind. Tonight he simply walks, driven by a need to be away from walls and gates and mocking guards. The mount rises before him, dotted with ancient olive trees whose gnarled trunks have witnessed centuries of prayer and prophecy. Nathan finds a spot beneath one of the oldest trees where the roots have created a natural seat in the earth. He lowers himself down, his back against the trunk, and looks west toward Jerusalem. From here, the city appears almost peaceful. The palace sits at its heart, torches burning through the night like stars brought down to earth. Somewhere in those holes, David sleeps. And somewhere Nathan knows God watches. The night air is cold. Nathan pulls his cloak tighter and begins to pray. Not with words at first. Words feel inadequate for what churns inside him. Instead, he simply opens himself to the presence he felt in his dwelling. The voice that shattered his lamps and his peace in a single breath. "I don't know how to do this," he whispers eventually. "I don't know how to stand before a king and speak the words you've given me. He's your anointed, the man you chose, the boy who faced Goliath when warriors fled. How do I tell him he's fallen?" The stars wheel overhead in their ancient dance. An owl calls from somewhere in the darkness. Jerusalem breathes below him, unaware that judgment stands at its gates. Nathan's eyes grow heavy as the night deepens, but sleep doesn't come. Instead, something else arrives. A vision vivid and unavoidable, pressing itself against his consciousness until he surrenders to it. He sees two houses side by side in a village. The first house is large, prosperous, surrounded by stone fences that enclose pastures filled with sheep and cattle. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The wealth is staggering. The owner stands at his gate, surveying his possessions with satisfaction. The second house is small, humble, a poor man's dwelling with a tiny courtyard. And in that courtyard, a single lamb, but such a lamb, white as new wool, gentle-eyed, beloved. The poor man cradles it like a child. His daughter feeds it from her hand. At night, Nathan sees in the vision, the lamb sleeps in the house, curled beside the fire. This lamb is not livestock, it's family. Then the vision shifts. A traveler arrives at the rich man's gate, dusty from the road, hungry. Custom demands hospitality. The rich man must provide a feast. Nathan watches as the rich man surveys his vast flocks, counts his abundance, calculates the cost, and then, inexplicably, horrifyingly, the rich man turns away from his own sheep. He walks to his neighbor's house. He takes the lamb, the only lamb, the beloved lamb, from the arms of the poor man's daughter. Her scream pierces the vision. The poor man pleads, offers everything he has, but the rich man is unmoved. The lamb is slaughtered, prepared, served to the traveler who knows nothing of the theft, the violation, the theft of what could never be replaced. Nathan jerks awake, except he wasn't asleep. The vision releases him, but its impact remains. His hands are shaking. His breath comes in short gasps. The eastern sky is beginning to lighten. He's been on the mountain all night. He understands immediately the parable, the story, the way to reach a king's heart without triggering a king's defenses. David is a man of stories, of songs, of poetry. He speaks in metaphors and responds to them. This is the key, the door, the way in. Nathan rises stiffly, his joints protesting the night spent against the tree. He brushes dirt from his cloak and begins the descent back to Jerusalem. But before he goes, he finds a stone, smooth, palm-sized, pale gray in the growing light. He takes out a sharp rock and begins to carve. His hands are steadier now, guided by certainty. 2 words, simple, final, you are. He holds the stone in his hand, feeling its weight. This stone will become the hinge on which everything turns. The moment when a story about strangers becomes a mirror. He tucks it into his belt and starts walking. For 3 days, Nathan returns to the palace gates. 3 days of standing in the morning sun, staff in hand, waiting. The guards recognize him now. They've stopped mocking. His persistence has earned a grudging respect, or perhaps just boredom. But the answer remains the same. The king is not receiving prophets today. The king is in council. The king has commanded no audiences this week. Nathan waits anyway. He takes up position where the guards can see him, where anyone entering or leaving the palace must pass by. He becomes a fixture, a silent reproach, a question mark in shepherd's clothing. On the 4th day, everything changes. A servant emerges from the palace, approaches Nathan directly. The man's face is carefully neutral, revealing nothing. "The king will see you," he says, "but not for prophecy. He requests that you bless his marriage to Lady Bathsheba. The ceremony was private. He desires a prophet's blessing to make it complete before the Lord." Nathan's stomach turns to stone. Of course, David doesn't want to hear from God. He wants God's approval. He wants a prophet to stand before the people and declare heaven's sanction on what heaven abhors. The servant watches him, waiting for a response. Nathan looks up at the palace, at the cedar doors that are finally opening for him, and feels the weight of the carved stone against his hip. He thinks of the vision, the rich man and the poor man, the stolen lamb. In it, "Tell the king," Nathan says slowly, "that I will come, but I have a matter to bring before him first. A legal dispute that requires his judgment." The servant frowns slightly. A legal dispute between 2 men in a village. It requires the king's wisdom. Nathan meets the servant's eyes. "Tell him this. Tell him the prophet seeks his justice before offering his blessing." The servant hesitates, clearly uncertain whether this deviation from the king's request will be welcome. But finally, he nods and disappears back through the gates. Nathan waits. The sun climbs higher. The guards shift their weight, exchange quiet words. A merchant passes by with a cart of grain, wheels creaking. Jerusalem conducts its business, unaware that in the next hour everything will fracture. The servant returns. "The king will hear your dispute. Come now." Nathan follows him through the bronze gates into the palace courtyard. His sandals whisper against polished stone. Servants bow as they pass. The wealth here is staggering. Carved pillars, woven tapestries, bronze fixtures that gleam like fire. This is what victory looks like, what God's blessing builds. And somewhere in these halls, a woman grieves her murdered husband while carrying his killer's child. They enter the throne room. Nathan's eyes need a moment to adjust to the dimmer interior. When they do, he sees David. The king sits on his throne, draped in purple and gold. His beard is oiled. His crown catches the light from high windows. He looks every inch the monarch, powerful, confident, secure in his authority. But there's something in his eyes, some flicker that Nathan recognizes. Guilt buried deep, covered over with royal prerogative and the intoxication of unchallenged power. But guilt nonetheless. Beside the throne, on a smaller seat, sits Bathsheba. She's dressed in royal blue, her hair veiled, her eyes downcast. She doesn't look at Nathan, doesn't look at anyone. She sits perfectly still, a beautiful statue, a living trophy. Nathan's heart breaks for her, even as the stone in his belt seems to grow heavier. David leans forward, his voice warm. "Nathan, old friend, my servant says you have a legal matter requiring my judgment. Speak, I'm listening." Nathan steps forward, staff in hand, and bows. Not too deep. He's a prophet, not a courtier, but enough to show proper respect. When he straightens, he sees David's eyes flick to the other people in the room. Advisors standing along the walls, guards at the doors, servants waiting in the shadows, an audience. The king wants witnesses to his wisdom, his justice. "Perfect, my lord," King Nathan begins, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "I come before you because a grave injustice has occurred, and the elders of the village cannot agree on the proper judgment. They have sent me to seek the wisdom of Israel's anointed king." David nods, settling back into his throne. This is familiar territory for him, dispensing justice, making rulings, being the final word on matters of law. He's good at this. "But tell me the case," he says. Nathan plants his staff, lets his eyes sweep the room as if checking that everyone is listening. "There were two men in a certain town," he begins. "One was very rich, the other was very poor." Already, the language is working. David's face shows interest. He's always been drawn to stories, to the human drama beneath the law. Nathan can almost see the king's mind engaging, picturing the scene. "Was the rich man," Nathan continues, "owned enormous flocks and herds, more sheep and cattle than could easily be counted. His pastures stretched across the hills, his storehouses overflowed with wool and meat. He lacked nothing. Whatever he desired, he possessed." Nathan pauses, lets the image settle. Several advisors nod knowingly. They've seen such wealth, perhaps possess it themselves. The poor man, however, had nothing. Nothing except one small ewe lamb. Nathan's voice softens here, grows tender. He had bought this lamb with the few coins he'd saved. He raised it in his home. It grew up with his children. It shared their food, drank from their cup. It slept in his arms like a daughter. It was more than an animal to him, my lord. It was family. It was love made flesh and wool. Bathsheba's hands tightened in her lap. Nathan sees it, though she doesn't raise her eyes. Across the room, one of the younger advisors shifts uncomfortably. They don't know yet where this story leads, but something in the telling is making them uneasy. David, however, leans forward, fully engaged. "Go on," he says. "A traveler came to the rich man's house." Nathan continues. "Custom demanded hospitality. A meal had to be prepared. The rich man went out to his flocks to select an animal for slaughter." This is the moment. Nathan lets the silence stretch just long enough. Every eye in the room is on him, but the rich man was unwilling to take from his own flocks. Nathan's voice hardens. He couldn't bear to diminish his own wealth, not even by a single lamb. So instead, he went to the poor man's house. He took the ewe lamb, the only lamb, the beloved lamb, and he slaughtered it to feed his guest. The throne room erupts in murmurs. Advisors exchange shocked glances. Even the guards react, their faces showing disgust. This isn't a complex legal matter requiring wisdom. This is obvious, monstrous. David rises from his throne, his face flushed with rage. The king who once shepherded his father's flocks, who knows the bond between a shepherd and his sheep, who has written songs about the good shepherd. This king cannot abide such cruelty. "As surely as the Lord lives," David roars, his voice shaking the rafters. "The man who did this deserves to die." Nathan feels the words land like hammer blows. This is it, the declaration. The king has pronounced judgment, has set the standard, has declared what justice demands. But David isn't finished. His righteousness is fully kindled now, his sense of justice inflamed. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over. The king continues, his fist slamming down on the arm of his throne, because he did such a thing and had no pity. The room falls silent. Everyone waits to hear Nathan confirm that yes, this rich man will be found and punished. Justice will be served. The king has spoken. Nathan reaches into his belt. His fingers close around the stone. Every eye in the room follows his hand as he draws it out. Holds it up where everyone can see, carved into the pale gray surface. Clear and unmistakable. "You are..." Nathan takes 3 steps forward. His eyes lock with David's. The king's face shows confusion at first, then the beginning of understanding, then something that might be fear. "You are the man," Nathan says. The words drop into the silence like stones into still water. The ripples spread outward. An advisor gasps. Bathsheba's head snaps up, her eyes wide. A guard's hand moves instinctively toward his sword. David stands frozen, his mouth slightly open, his rage-flushed face draining of color. Nathan doesn't step back, doesn't soften his gaze, doesn't give the king anywhere to hide. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel," he continues. And now his voice carries the weight of heaven. "I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah, and if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more." The throne room has become a tomb. No one moves. No one breathes. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? Nathan's voice cracks like a whip. "You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Ammonites. You took his wife to be your own. You murdered him to cover your adultery." Bathsheba makes a small sound, quickly stifled. Her face has gone pale as milk. David's mouth works, but no sound emerges. The king who commands armies, who writes songs, who shapes the destiny of nations. This king has been struck mute. An advisor steps forward, his face purple with outrage. "This is treason," he shouts, pointing at Nathan. God sees him. He accuses the Lord's anointed of silence. David's voice is barely a whisper, but it cuts through the commotion like a blade. Everyone freezes. The king holds up one hand, and the advisor falls back, though his face still burns with indignation. David's eyes never leave Nathan's face. "Everyone out," the king says quietly. "Leave us, my lord. You cannot be alone with this man," the advisor protests. He's clearly out. The roar is back, but it's different now. Not righteous anger. Something more desperate, more dangerous. All of you now. The room empties in seconds. Advisors file out quickly, avoiding Nathan's eyes. Guards retreat to the outer doors. Servants vanish like smoke. Only Bathsheba remains, standing slowly from her chair. "You too," David says, not looking at her. She moves toward the door, her steps measured, dignified, but as she passes Nathan she pauses for just a heartbeat. Her eyes meet his, and in them, Nathan sees not anger, but something like gratitude, as if someone has finally spoken the truth she's been drowning in. Then she's gone, and Nathan stands alone with the king. The silence stretches. David descends from his throne slowly, like a man much older than his years. He begins to pace, his royal robes swishing against the floor. Nathan stands still, staff planted, the carved stone still visible in his other hand. "I am anointed," David finally says, his voice low and rough. "I united the tribes. I built this kingdom from nothing. I brought the ark to Jerusalem. I danced before the Lord with all my strength." He turns to face Nathan, and his eyes are wild. "I am David, the Lord's chosen." Nathan says nothing. The stone speaks for him. David's pacing becomes more agitated. "She was bathing. I saw her from the roof. How was I supposed to?" He cuts himself off, runs a hand through his hair. "Uriah was a soldier. Soldiers die in battle. It happens every day." Still, Nathan remains silent. The king grabs a golden pitcher from a nearby table and hurls it against the wall. It clangs, bounces, rolls across the floor. Water streams down the stone like tears. "Say something," David shouts. "Condemn me. Tell me what God thinks of his anointed now." Nathan takes a breath. "The sword will never depart from your house," he says, and his voice is surprisingly gentle. "Because you despised the Lord and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Calamity will rise against you from your own family. I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will lie with them in broad daylight." David staggers as if struck. He catches himself against his throne, his knuckles white. "You did this in secret," Nathan continues, "but God will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel." The king slides down to the floor, his back against the throne, his crown askew. He looks nothing like the man who killed Goliath. He looks like a boy caught in a sin too big to comprehend. Nathan stands over him, and the next words are the hardest he's ever had to speak. "The child born of this union, the son Bathsheba carries, will die." David's head snaps up, his eyes filled with horror. "No, no, take me, punish me. But not the child will die," Nathan repeats, and he hates every syllable. "Because by doing this you have made the enemies of the Lord show utter contempt." Nathan turns to leave. He's delivered the message, spoken the judgment. His part is done. But David's broken whisper stops him at the door. "Can God forgive this?" Nathan's hand rests on the doorframe. He doesn't turn around. The question hangs in the air between them. A king's last hope. A prophet's impossible burden. Nathan's hand remains on the doorframe, his back still to the crumpled king. The question echoes through the vast chamber. Can God forgive this? For a long moment, Nathan doesn't move. He feels the weight of every word he's spoken, every pronouncement of judgment, every stroke of divine fury he's channeled into this room. Behind him, he can hear David's ragged breathing, the small sounds of a man coming undone. The prophet knows what theology demands. He knows the law carved in stone, absolute and uncompromising adultery, murder, abuse of power. These aren't minor infractions. These are capital offenses. The same law that condemns the rich man for stealing a lamb condemns the king for stealing a life. But he also knows something else, something deeper than law. The God who gave the commandments is the same God who pursued Israel through the wilderness despite their rebellion. The God who demands holiness is the same God who provides atonement. Nathan slowly turns around. David hasn't moved. He's still on the floor, crown fallen beside him, his royal robes pulled around him like grave clothes. His face is wet with tears. This is not a king anymore. This is a man stripped bare before heaven. The Lord, Nathan says quietly, has taken away your sin. David's head jerks up, eyes wide with disbelief. You will not die, Nathan continues, stepping closer. God has put away your sin. But in here his voice hardens again, because mercy and justice are not opposites but partners, because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord. The son born to you will die. The words are a mixed cup. Grace and consequence poured together, inseparable. David covers his face with his hands and begins to weep in earnest now. Not the tears of a man caught, but the tears of a man who has seen both the depth of his fall and the impossible reach of mercy. Nathan doesn't comfort him. Some griefs must be fully felt, fully inhabited before healing can begin. He turns again and walks toward the door, his staff tapping against the stone floor. Nathan, David's voice is raw. What do I do now? The prophet pauses, looks back one more time. You repent, he says simply, before God, before the people. You own what you've done, and you live with the consequences. Then he's through the door into the corridor where advisors and guards have been waiting, their faces tense with curiosity and concern. They step aside as Nathan passes, but he can feel their stares, can almost hear their whispered questions beginning before he's even out of earshot. Nathan walks through the palace, through the courtyard, through the bronze gates he stood before days ago. The afternoon sun hits his face, warm and ordinary. Jerusalem continues its daily rhythm. Merchants hawking wares, children playing in the streets, women carrying water from the well. The world hasn't ended, though it feels like it should have. His feet carry him home through streets that blur around him. He barely registers the journey. When he reaches his modest dwelling, Ada is waiting at the door, her face tight with worry. The whole city is talking, she says. They're saying you confronted the king, that you accused him of murder. Nathan steps inside, sets down his staff, and sinks onto a bench. The adrenaline that's been sustaining him drains away all at once, leaving him hollow and shaking. It's done, he says. I spoke what I was given to speak. Kneels beside him, takes his hands in hers, and the king confessed. God has granted mercy, but the child. Nathan's voice breaks. The child will die that night. Nathan cannot sleep. He lies on his mat, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Did he speak too harshly? Should he have found gentler words? The image of Bathsheba's pale face haunts him. A woman who has lost her husband, who now will lose her child, who has become a pawn in the collision between a king's desire and God's justice. And what of the child himself? Innocent, utterly innocent, yet condemned. Nathan wrestles with this through the dark hours. He knows the theological answers, that sin has consequences, that judgment sometimes falls on the innocent, that God's ways are higher than human understanding. But theology provides little comfort when he imagines that infant E struggling for breath, dying because of sins he didn't commit. I don't understand, Nathan whispers into the darkness. I spoke your words, but this child, no answer comes, only silence. The kind of silence that invites trust without providing certainty. Morning arrives too soon. Nathan rises, washes, prays. He expects perhaps a quiet day, time to process, to recover. Instead, a knock comes at his door before he's finished his bread. A palace servant stands there, eyes downcast. The prophet is requested to leave the city for a time. The man says quietly, the king's advisors feel that your presence is causing unrest. Nathan understands immediately. He's become inconvenient. A reminder the advisors want to smooth this over, to let the scandal die down, to restore normalcy, and a prophet standing in the marketplace known to have rebuked the king prevents that. Am I being exiled? Nathan asks, requested to withdraw. The servant corrects carefully, for the good of the kingdom, for peace. Nathan almost laughs. Peace. As if silence could create peace. As if pretending righteousness exists while ignoring sin could somehow produce stability. But he doesn't fight it. Perhaps distance is what's needed now. Perhaps both he and David need space to process what has happened. I'll go, Nathan says, but tell the king's advisors this. Truth doesn't disappear because the truth teller leaves the city. What has been spoken has been spoken. The servant nods nervously and hurries away. Greater than, greater than, greater than, greater than. Nathan spends the day preparing to leave. Ada will stay. Someone must maintain their home, their small plot of land. He packs light, a blanket, some bread, his writing materials, the scrolls. He cannot be without the carved stone. You are. He wraps carefully and tucks into his bag. By afternoon, he's ready. But before he leaves Jerusalem, there's one person he must see. He makes his way through the narrow streets to a modest house near the palace district. This is where Bathsheba lived before David took her, where she lived with Uriah. The house stands empty now. She's been moved to the palace, but her mother still lives in the house next door. Nathan knocks. An older woman answers, her face lined with grief and anger. She recognizes him immediately. You, she says, her voice sharp. The prophet who condemned my daughter to this fate. Nathan bows his head. I did not condemn her. I condemned the man who took her. And yet she's the one who will lose her child. The woman's eyes blazed. She's the one who weeps alone in those palace rooms. She's the one who buried her husband and now must watch her infant die. Tell me, prophet, where is the justice in that? Nathan has no answer that will satisfy her. May I give you something? He asks instead for Bathsheba. The woman hesitates, then nods curtly. Nathan pulls a small scroll from his bag. He's written it this morning in the quiet hours before dawn. Tell her, he says, that I see her, that God sees her, that she is not forgotten in this story, and that, though the judgment stands, mercy is still possible, even for her. The woman takes the scroll without reading it, her expression unchanged, but as Nathan turns to leave, she speaks again. Did he weep? The king Nathan looks back. Yes, he wept like a broken man. Good, she says bitterly, and closes the door. Nathan leaves Jerusalem as the sun begins its descent. He heads east toward the wilderness, toward the places where prophets have always gone to hear God more clearly. The city falls away behind him, but he can't shake the weight of what he's left behind. By the 4th day of his voluntary exile, the news reaches him. A shepherd passing through the area mentions it casually, not knowing he's speaking to the prophet at the center of the storm. Strange happenings in the palace. The shepherd says the king's new son has fallen ill. They say David won't eat, won't leave the child's side, lies on the ground day and night, begging God to spare the boy. Nathan's hands tremble as he takes this in. He knew it would come, spoke the words himself, but knowing and experiencing are different things. How long has the child been sick? Nathan asks. It's 3 days now. The physicians can do nothing. The queen is distraught. The shepherd shakes his head. They say it's a curse that God himself struck the child. After the shepherd leaves, Nathan climbs to a high place and looks west toward Jerusalem. Somewhere in that city a king lies prostrate, fasting and pleading. A mother holds her dying infant, and a nation watches, wondering what kind of God demands such a price. Nathan builds a small fire as night falls. The flames flicker in the wind, nearly dying several times before catching hold. He watches them dance, remembering the words he spoke. The sword will never depart from your house. This is only the beginning. The child's death is the first consequence. But Nathan knows there will be others. The parable of the rich man stealing the lamb wasn't just about Bathsheba. It was about a pattern, a breaking of trust, a fracture in the foundation of David's kingdom that will spiderweb outward for generations. 7 days. The child clings to life for 7 impossible days. Greater than greater than greater than greater than. Nathan receives reports from travelers, from merchants passing through his wilderness refuge, from a loyal servant who rides out secretly to keep him informed. Each report is the same. The child grows weaker. David refuses food. The king lies on the ground in sackcloth, his face pressed to the stone floor of his chambers. He will not wash, will not change his clothes, will not conduct any business of state. The elders try to raise him up. His commanders plead with him to eat. Nothing moves him. He has become a living prayer, a prostrate petition, a father begging for his son's life. And Bathsheba, the reports say little of her. She remains in her chambers, the child in her arms, surrounded by wet nurses and physicians who can do nothing but watch. Some say she doesn't weep, some say she's past tears, that grief has frozen her into silence. Nathan spends those 7 days in a kind of anguished vigil of his own. He prays not for the judgment to be reversed because he knows it won't be, but for strength, for David, for Bathsheba, for the servants who must witness this slow-motion tragedy, for the nation that watches its king come undone. On the 8th day, the runner arrives before dawn. Nathan is already awake, unable to sleep. He sees the figure approaching from the direction of Jerusalem, moving quickly despite the early hour. He knows before the man speaks what news he carries. The child is dead, the runner says, breathing hard. Why he passed just after midnight. Nathan closes his eyes, feels the words settle into his bones. How did the king receive it? That's why I was sent to find you. The runner looks confused, almost disturbed. The king rose, he washed himself, changed his clothes, went to the house of the Lord, and worshipped. Then he came home and asked for food. Nathan's eyes open. What? His servants were terrified to tell him the child had died. They thought he might harm himself since he was so distraught while the boy lived. But when they finally told him, the runner shakes his head. He just stood up like a man released from prison. He were ripped, he ate, he's calm. This makes no sense. Nathan had expected devastation, had braced himself for news of a king's complete collapse. But this sounds like acceptance, surrender, the kind of response that comes only when a man has wrestled with God and finally let go. I must return, Nathan says immediately, gathering his few belongings. The runner nods. The king requests your presence. He sent me specifically to find you. He says, there's something you need to see. They make the journey to Jerusalem quickly, arriving as the sun reaches its zenith. The city is subdued. Word has spread about the child's death. People speak in hushed tones. Shops conduct business quietly. Even the children seem to play more softly than usual. The palace guards recognize Nathan and let him pass without question. A servant leads him through corridors he's walked before. But instead of the throne room, they go to the private royal chambers. David stands at a window looking out over Jerusalem. He's dressed simply. No crown, no purple robe, just clean clothes and a composed expression. When he hears Nathan enter, he turns. The prophet stops, studying the king's face. The eyes are red-rimmed but clear. The grief is visible but not consuming. There's something else there too, something Nathan didn't expect to see. Peace. You came, David says simply. I was summoned. No, David shakes his head. You chose to come. You could have stayed in the wilderness. Many prophets would have. Nathan sets down his staff. Waits. This is David's moment to speak. The king moves to a table, pours wine into 2 cups with his own hands, an act of humility from a monarch, and offers one to Nathan. The prophet accepts it, but doesn't drink. My servants thought I'd lost my mind, David says, a sad smile touching his lips. When the child was alive, I fasted and wept. When he died, I rose and ate. They couldn't understand. Can you help me understand? Nathan asks quietly. David looks down at his wine. While the child lived, I thought perhaps if I humbled myself enough, if I pray hard enough, if I show God how truly sorry I am, he might relent. Who knows? God is gracious. He might change his mind. Nathan nods. This is the wrestling, the desperate bargaining every parent does when death hovers near their child. But once he died, David continues, his voice steady despite the pain beneath it. There was no more perhaps. The answer was clear, and I realized. He pauses, searching for words. I realize that I can't bring him back. I will go to him someday, but he will not return to me. So what was the purpose in continued grief that does nothing? It's a stunning statement, not callous. Nathan can see the genuine sorrow in David's eyes, but rational, accepting a father who has looked into the abyss and chosen to keep living. The elders are disturbed. Nathan observes, they expected you to mourn for weeks. I mourned while he lived. I mourned for what I'd done to bring this upon him. David's jaw tightens, and I'll carry that for the rest of my days. But Nathan, he looks directly at the prophet now. You told me God has taken away my sin. You told me I wouldn't die. If that's true, then I have to live. Not just breathe and eat and occupy a throne, but actually live for him, for all the other sons I'll have, for the kingdom God still trusts me with despite everything. Nathan takes a slow breath. This is not the response he expected from a man who 7 days ago was prostrate in sackcloth. But perhaps it's exactly what David needed to learn, that judgment and mercy can coexist, that consequences don't negate grace, that accepting both fully honestly is the only path forward. There's someone I need you to see, David says, setting down his cup. Someone who needs to hear from the prophet who spoke judgment. He leads Nathan through a private corridor to another chamber. At the door, he pauses, then knocks softly. Enter, comes a woman's voice from inside. David opens the door, but doesn't go in. He gestures for Nathan to enter alone. Bathsheba sits by a window, the light falling across her face. She's been weeping. Her eyes are swollen, her face pale, but she sits upright, dignified. When she sees Nathan, she doesn't rise, doesn't bow, just looks at him with an expression he can't quite read. My lady, Nathan begins, but she raises a hand. My mother gave me your scroll, she says quietly, the one that said God sees me, that I'm not forgotten. Nathan waits. I wanted to hate you, she continues. The prophet who condemned my child, who spoke the words that killed him. I understand, but I can't. Her voice cracks slightly because you also spoke the truth about what was done to me, about Uriah, about. She stops, composes herself. No one else has named it, not the elders, not the advisors, not even David, until you forced him to see it. They all wanted to pretend this was a love story, a romance, not what it actually was. Nathan moves closer, still careful to maintain respectful distance. What it actually was, he says gently, was a king taking what didn't belong to him, using power where there should have been protection. I'm sorry for all of it. Bathsheba looks out the window. My son paid the price for sins he didn't commit. Do you know how that feels to hold your child and know he's dying because of what was done to you, what you couldn't prevent? No, Nathan admits. I don't. She's quiet for a long moment. Then David came to me this morning after he learned the child was gone. He didn't just weep for his son. He wept for Uriah, for me. He spoke my husband's name, actually spoke it aloud, and asked my forgiveness. Nathan's eyebrows raise slightly. This too is unexpected. I don't know if I can give it, Bathsheba says honestly. Not yet, maybe not ever. But he asked, and that matters. She turns from the window to face Nathan fully. The child is dead. Uriah is dead. Those things can't be changed. So what do I do now, prophet? What does the woman in this story do? Nathan sees in her eyes the same question David asked days ago. Can God forgive this? But her version is different. She's not asking if God can forgive sin. She's asking if God can redeem tragedy. If anything good can possibly grow from this scorched earth. You live, Nathan says, echoing the words he thought, watching David. You grieve. You heal as much as anyone can. And you watch for what God does next. What if there is no next? Her voice is almost a whisper. What if this is all there is? Punishment and loss, and a kingdom that whispers about me behind closed doors. Nathan thinks of the vision. The rich man and the poor man. The stolen lamb that could never be returned. But he also thinks of something else, a promise God once made to David, spoken through Nathan himself years ago. A promise about a kingdom that would endure, a throne that would be established forever, a son who would build God's house. God isn't finished with you, Nathan says carefully, or with David, or with this kingdom. The judgment stands. I won't lie to you about that. But judgment is not the end of the story. Bathsheba's hand moves unconsciously to her belly, though there's nothing there now. The gesture is instinctive, protective of a child who no longer exists. I'm still young, she says distantly. There could be other children, there will be, Nathan says, and the certainty in his voice surprises even him. He doesn't know where the words come from, but they arrive with the same weight as the words he spoke in judgment. You will have another son, and he will be loved by the Lord. Bathsheba's eyes widen. How do you know this? Nathan pauses, searching for an answer. He doesn't know, not with his mind, but something in his spirit has shifted as he spoke those words. A sense of completion, of circle closing, of death making way for life. I don't, he admits. Not the way I knew the judgment, but I feel it the way a shepherd feels a coming storm before the clouds gather. She studies his face, perhaps looking for false comfort, easy promises. Whatever she sees there seems to satisfy her. She nods slowly, then returns her gaze to the window. You may leave, prophet, she says, not unkindly. Tell the king I'll join him for the evening meal. It's time to continue. Nathan bows and withdraws. David waits in the corridor, his expression anxious. She dined with you tonight, Nathan reports. Relief floods the king's face. Thank you for speaking to her, for he trails off. For telling her the truth, Nathan finishes. That's what prophets do, my lord, even when, especially when it costs. David clasps Nathan's shoulder, a gesture between friends rather than king and subject. Stay in Jerusalem. I need your voice. The kingdom needs it. But Nathan shakes his head. Not yet. You need time without me standing in your peripheral vision reminding you of what was spoken. The people need to see their king without the prophet who rebuked him at his side. Give it time. How much time until God sends me back? They part at the palace gates. Nathan returns to his wilderness refuge, but this time the exile feels different. Not punishment or convenient removal, but necessary distance. A foul period, space for healing that can't happen in the heat of immediate aftermath. Weeks pass, then months. Nathan receives occasional reports. David has returned to his duties, governing with renewed focus. The scandal hasn't disappeared. These things never do, but it has settled into whispered history rather than fresh gossip. The kingdom continues. Life goes on, and then 6 months after the child's death, the runner comes again. The queen is with child. He announces, slightly breathless from his journey. The king requests you return to Jerusalem. He wants you present when the child is born. Nathan makes the journey the next morning. This time his return is quiet. No fanfare, no official announcement. He slips back into the city and takes up residence in his old home where Ada welcomes him with relief and questions he doesn't fully answer. The months of Bathsheba's pregnancy unfold in strange contrast to the last. Then the palace had been a place of hidden guilt and coming judgment. Now there's cautious hope. David is attentive but not possessive. Bathsheba is cared for but not smothered. The whole atmosphere feels different, chastened, humble, aware of how quickly blessing can turn to loss. Nathan visits the palace occasionally, always at David's request, never presuming the king has changed. There's a sobriety to him now, a weight behind his eyes that wasn't there before. His psalms, the servants whisper about this, have grown deeper, darker, more honest. He writes about sin and confession, about broken spirits and crushed hearts, about God who doesn't despise a contrite heart. One afternoon, Nathan finds David in his private chamber working on a new psalm. Parchment is scattered everywhere, some pieces crumpled, others covered in crossed-out lines and revisions. Listen to this, David says without preamble, his voice urgent, and tell me if it's true. He reads, Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin, for I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Nathan listens as David continues, the words raw and unguarded. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. When David finishes, he looks up. Too much, too honest. No, Nathan says quietly, not for a man who's truly seen himself. I want the people to sing this, David says. I want them to know that their king isn't above the law, that I fell, that I still need God's mercy. He pauses. Is that foolish? Will it weaken their faith in the throne? Nathan considers. In a world where kings claim divine right and infallibility, David's confession is revolutionary, dangerous even, but also deeply, profoundly true. It will strengthen their faith in God, Nathan says finally. Let them sing it. The months continue to pass. Bathsheba's pregnancy progresses without complication, but the palace holds its collective breath. Everyone remembers the last child. Everyone wonders if this one will survive, if the curse is lifted, if mercy has truly replaced judgment. Nathan himself feels the tension. He prays daily, sometimes hourly, for this child, not to change God's mind. He knows better than to bargain with the Almighty, but simply to ask for grace, for life, for a sign that restoration is possible. When Bathsheba's time comes, the palace erupts into controlled chaos. Midwives rush to her chambers. David paces the corridors outside, refusing to leave. his face pale with barely suppressed fear. He's lived this before, watched a child die despite all his prayers. The memory haunts him. Nathan stands with him in the corridor. They don't speak. There's nothing to say. They simply wait. Two men who have walked through fire together, hoping for water on the other side. Hours pass. The sun sets. Lamps are lit. Still they wait. Then finally, a cry. Not a woman's cry of pain, but the sharp, clear wail of a newborn. David's knees buckle. Nathan catches him, helps him stay upright. A midwife emerges, her face bright with relief and joy. A son, my lord, healthy and strong. The queen as well. David doesn't wait for permission. He pushes past the midwife into the chamber. Nathan follows more slowly, giving the family space, but unable to stay away entirely. Bathsheba lies on the bed, exhausted but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in soft cloth, a baby with a crown of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. He's screaming, a good sign. The midwives always say, strong lungs, vigorous life. David approaches slowly, almost reverently. He looks down at his son and tears stream down his face. He lives, the king whispers. He lives. Bathsheba looks up at her husband and something passes between them. Not forgiveness. That's still too large, too complicated. But maybe the beginning of it. The first fragile bridge across the chasm. What will you name him? Nathan asks from the doorway. David looks at Bathsheba. She nods, giving him the honor. Solomon, the king says, because the Lord has given us peace. He pauses, then adds, Jediah. Nathan's breath catches. Jediah, beloved of the Lord. Yes, David says firmly. Let it be known that this child, this son, is loved by God, not cursed, not marked by his parents. Sin-loved. Nathan steps forward, looks down at the infant. Such a small thing, this baby, unaware of the storm that preceded his birth, the judgment that fell on his brother, the scandal that surrounds his very existence. And yet Nathan feels it again. That certainty that gripped him months ago when he spoke to Bathsheba. This child matters. This child is part of something larger than the tragedy that came before. May I? Nathan asks, gesturing toward the baby. Bathsheba nods. Nathan takes Solomon gently, holds him with the practiced ease of a man who has blessed many infants. The baby quiets, looking up at the prophet with unfocused eyes. Nathan begins to pray, his voice low but clear. Lord God of Israel, you who judge righteously and show mercy abundantly, look upon this child. May he grow in wisdom and stature. May he know your presence all his days. May he build what his father could not. And may your name be glorified through his life. As he prays, something shifts in the room. The midwives feel it growing very still. David feels it, his eyes widening slightly. Even Bathsheba, exhausted as she is, seems to sense a presence beyond the natural. Nathan looks down at the infant in his arms and sees possibility. Not certainty, not a vision of the future, but the raw potential of a life not yet lived. A throne not yet occupied, a temple not yet built, wisdom not yet gained. He hands Solomon back to his mother, steps back. The Lord loves him, Nathan says, and it's a pronouncement, a prophecy, a promise. Whatever came before, that truth remains. The Lord loves this child. David sinks into a chair beside Bathsheba's bed, looking at his son with wonder and lingering fear. Will the sword still come? He asks Nathan quietly. Ed, the judgment you spoke, does it still stand? Nathan's face grows somber. He won't lie, won't offer false comfort. Yes, the consequences of sin don't disappear because grace appears. Your house will know conflict. David, your sons will war with each other. The sword will not depart. Bathsheba's arms tighten around Solomon. But Nathan continues, and his voice softens. Judgment and promise can coexist. The sword will come, but so will blessing. So will this child's reign. So will a kingdom that outlasts you. God is both just and merciful, and we live in the tension between them. The years that follow prove Nathan's words with brutal accuracy. Solomon grows strong and healthy, a bright child who seems to absorb knowledge like parched ground drinks rain. He's 7 years old when the first real blow falls on David's house. When Amnon, David's eldest son, violates his half-sister Tamar, the scandal rips through the palace like wildfire. David rages but does nothing. He cannot bring himself to punish his son with the full weight of the law. Not after what he himself has done. The inaction fierce, Tamar's full brother Absalom watches his father's paralysis. Watches justice denied, and something hardens in him. 2 years later, he takes matters into his own hands. Amnon is murdered at a feast, his blood spilled in revenge for Tamar's honor. Absalom flees into exile. Nathan watches from the edges, his heart breaking for the kingdom, for David, for all the children caught in the aftermath of their father's sin. The sword has begun its work, cutting through the house of David with ruthless precision. But the worst is yet to come. 5 years pass. Absalom returns to Jerusalem, reconciled with David, but not truly at peace. He's grown into a stunning young man, beautiful, charismatic, politically brilliant, and hungry. Hungry for power, for vindication, for the throne he believes should already be his. Nathan sees it building. He tries to warn David, but the king is caught in his own web of guilt and love. How can he be hard on Absalom when he himself has sinned so grievously? How can he judge his son when God has shown him mercy? My lord, Nathan says one afternoon in the palace. Your son is gathering support among the tribes. He positions himself at the city gates, offering judgment to those who come seeking the king's justice. He's undermining you. David waves a hand dismissively. Absalom is young, ambitious, but he's my son. He wouldn't. He would. Nathan interrupts, his voice sharp. The sword, David, the sword I warned you about. It's in your house and it's in your son's hand, but David won't listen. Can't listen. The guilt that drove him to such deep repentance has also crippled his ability to discipline his own children. He loves them too much, forgives them too quickly, sees his own failures reflected in theirs, and cannot bear to judge them. The rebellion erupts on an ordinary spring morning. The runner arrives at Nathan's dwelling gasping. Absalom has declared himself king in Hebron. He's raised an army. The people are flocking to him. Nathan's blood runs cold. Where is David? Fleeing Jerusalem. He's taking his household and his loyal guards. He said the runner swallows hard. He said he won't fight his son in the city, won't spill blood in the place where the ark dwells. Nathan grabs his staff and runs. Actually runs through the streets toward the palace. By the time he arrives, the scene is chaos. Servants rushing everywhere, packing belongings, loading carts. The king's household preparing for evacuation like refugees from an invading army. And at the center of it all, David, the king, stands in the courtyard, dressed not in royal robes, but in rough traveling clothes. His face is set, grim, aged beyond his years. When he sees Nathan, something in his expression crumbles. It's happening, David says quietly. What you said, the sword, it's in my son's hand and it's pointed at my throne. Nathan grips the king's arm. You could fight, you have loyal men, the army would rally. No, David's voice is firm. I won't make Jerusalem a battlefield. I won't have my son's blood on the streets where I brought the ark. He looks at Nathan with eyes full of terrible clarity. This is the cost. You told me the sword would not depart. I deserve this. No one deserves to be betrayed by their child. Nathan says fiercely. Don't I? David's laugh is bitter. I took another man's wife. I murdered her husband. I showed my sons that power can override righteousness. That desire justifies any action. Absalom learned well, prophet. He learned from me. The words hang between them like an accusation no one else has dared to speak. Where will you go? Nathan asks. East across the Jordan. We'll see if any of the tribes remain loyal. David looks up at the palace, at the city he's ruled for decades. If God wills it, I'll return. If not, he doesn't finish. Nathan watches the king's procession leave Jerusalem. David on foot, not riding, his head covered in mourning. The people line the streets weeping. Some join the procession, others stand silent, uncertain where their loyalty lies. Bathsheba walks with the women, Solomon at her side. The boy is 12 now, old enough to understand what's happening. His face is pale but composed. He holds his mother's hand tightly as they pass through the city gates. Nathan doesn't go with them. His place is here in Jerusalem to witness what comes next, to be the eyes and ears of prophecy in a city about to fall into the hands of a usurper. Absalom enters Jerusalem 3 days later with an army at his back. He's magnificent, riding a white horse, his long hair flowing, his smile brilliant and confident. The people cheer. They're tired of David's melancholy, his psalms of repentance, his guilt-ridden rule. Absalom represents youth, strength, a fresh start. Nathan stands in the crowd watching, his heart sick. Absalom makes his first royal act a calculated obscenity. He has a tent pitched on the palace roof, the very roof where David once stood and saw Bathsheba bathing. And there, in full view of all Jerusalem, he takes his father's concubines. 10 women violated publicly to demonstrate that Absalom has fully claimed his father's throne. The prophecy, Nathan's own words spoken years ago in judgment. I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will lie with them in broad daylight. Nathan closes his eyes against the sight, against the fulfillment of his own pronouncement. The sword cuts both ways, the guilty and the innocent bleeding together. For weeks, Jerusalem holds its breath. Absalom consolidates power, appoints his own advisors, prepares to march against David and finish what he started. And Nathan watches, prays, waits. Then comes the day when Absalom's army mobilizes, 20,000 men heading east to find David and destroy him. The city empties of young men eager for glory or convinced of Absalom's cause. Nathan knows he should stay in Jerusalem, should maintain his witness, but something drives him to follow. He trails the army at a distance, an old man with a staff keeping to the shadows. The battle happens in the forest of Ephraim, a wild tangle of ancient oaks and dense undergrowth. Nathan never sees the fighting itself. He's too far back, too old to keep pace with warriors, but he hears it. The clash of swords, the screams, the chaos of 20,000 men trying to kill each other among the trees. By evening it's over. David's forces have won. Absalom's army is shattered, fleeing in every direction. Nathan makes his way through the forest, searching. Bodies lie everywhere. Young men cut down in their prime, their blood soaking into the forest floor. The trees themselves seem to mourn, their branches heavy with death. Then he sees the crowd of soldiers gathered around something. He pushes through his prophet's authority, granting him passage. Absalom hangs from an oak tree, his body pierced with javelins. His beautiful hair, the pride that made him famous, is caught in the thick branches. suspending him between earth and sky. His eyes are open, staring at nothing. Joab, David's commander, stands nearby, cleaning his weapon. He sees Nathan and his jaw tightens. The king's orders were to spare him, Nathan says, his voice hollow. The king's orders, Joab replies coldly, would have left us with endless civil war. The boy needed to die for the kingdom. Nathan looks at Absalom's body, at the waste of it, the tragedy. A son who could have been great, twisted by his father's failures into rebellion and death. Who will tell David? Nathan asks. A messenger has already gone. Joab sheaths his sword. The king will know within the hour. Nathan finds David in the city of Mahanaim, where he's been waiting for news of the battle. The messenger has just delivered his report. Victory, the rebellion crushed, the kingdom saved. But David doesn't celebrate. He doesn't even seem to hear the word victory. He stands, walks past everyone, climbs the stairs to the room above the city gate, and there he begins to weep. Nathan follows, stands at the base of the stairs. From above he hears the king's voice broken and raw. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." The words repeat over and over, a father's grief that cannot be comforted. Nathan sinks down against the wall, his own tears falling. This is the sword. Not clean, not simple, not just. It cuts the guilty and destroys the innocent. It takes a father's sin and turns it into a son's grave. Hours pass. David's sweeping continues, echoing through Mahanaim. The victorious soldiers return from battle to find their king mourning the enemy they've just defeated. Their celebration turns to shame. They slink into the city like men defeated, not victorious. Finally, Joab has had enough. He storms up to David's room and Nathan hears the confrontation from below. "You've humiliated your men," Joab roars. "They saved your life, your throne, your kingdom, and you sit here weeping for the son who tried to kill you. Get up, go out and encourage your troops, or by God they'll all desert you by morning." There's a long silence. Then David emerges, his face ravaged by grief but composed. He descends the stairs, passes Nathan without seeing him, and goes to sit at the city gate where his soldiers can see him. The king thanks his men, commends their bravery, promises rewards. His voice is steady, but his eyes are dead. Nathan watches and understands. David has returned to his throne, but something in him died in that forest with his son. The sword has cut all the way to the bone. The return to Jerusalem is not triumphant. David enters the city as a man who has lost everything that matters while keeping everything that doesn't. The throne is his again. The crown sits on his head. The palace receives him, but Absalom is dead. Amnon is dead. Tamar is broken. The sword has drunk deep from the house of David. Nathan walks beside the king's procession, silent. There are no words adequate for this kind of grief. No prophecies that could ease the weight of a father burying his son. Even the promises Nathan spoke years ago about Solomon, about blessing, about a kingdom that would endure feel distant and abstract against the immediate reality of loss. The city welcomes David back with muted relief. They're glad the rebellion is over, glad for stability, but they know what it cost. They see it in their king's face. That first night back in the palace, David sends for Nathan, the prophet, finds him in his private chambers, sitting alone in the darkness. No lamps lit, no servants attending, just a king in his shadows. "I keep thinking about that day," David says without preamble. "When you told me the parable, the rich man and the poor man, the stolen lamb." Nathan settles onto a bench across from him, waiting. "I was so angry," David continues, "so righteous. The man who did this deserves to die. I pronounced my own judgment without knowing it." He laughs a sound without humor. "And now I've watched that judgment unfold. My sons, my kingdom, everything cut by the sword you promised would never depart." "Yes," Nathan says simply. There's no comfort in denial. "But was it worth it?" David asks, and his voice breaks. That moment with Bathsheba, that decision that felt so small at the time. Was any pleasure worth this price? Nathan leans forward. "You know it wasn't." "Then why didn't God stop me?" David's anguish fills the room. He stopped Abraham from sacrificing Isaac. He closed wombs and opened them. He's parted seas and toppled walls. Why didn't he just prevent me from making that choice? "Because you're not a puppet." Nathan's voice is gentle but firm. God doesn't want your forced obedience. He wants your heart. And hearts can only be given freely, which means they can also be withheld. You chose David and choices have consequences. The king covers his face with his hands. For a long moment, the only sound is his ragged breathing. Then Nathan speaks again. "But God also chose. He chose to forgive you when you confessed. He chose to preserve your life when the law demanded death. He chose to promise that your throne would endure despite your failures. The sword came, yes, but so did mercy. Both are real. Both are true." David lowers his hands. "I don't feel mercy, I feel crushed." I know. Nathan pauses, then asks, "Where is Solomon?" "With Bathsheba in their chambers." "Why?" "Because that boy is part of the mercy." Nathan says, "He's alive, he's healthy, he's brilliant. And if you let grief consume you entirely, you'll miss what God is still doing in the midst of judgment." David is quiet for a long time. Then he rises, lights a lamp with trembling hands. The room fills with soft light, pushing back the darkness, but not eliminating it entirely. "I need to see them," David says. Nathan nods and follows as the king makes his way through the palace corridors. They reach Bathsheba's chambers and David knocks softly before entering. Bathsheba sits by a window working on embroidery. Solomon is at a small table studying scrolls by lamplight. They both look up when David enters and Nathan sees the weariness in their faces. The king has been so lost in grief for Absalom that he's barely spoken to anyone else. "Father," Solomon says, rising respectfully. David crosses the room and to everyone's surprise, he embraces his son tightly, as if afraid he might disappear. "I'm sorry," David whispers into Solomon's hair. "I've been so focused on the son I lost that I've neglected the son I have." Solomon returns the embrace, and Nathan sees tears streaming down the boy's face. He's 12 years old, watching his father's kingdom tear itself apart, wondering if he too might someday be caught in the violence that seems to follow David's bloodline. Bathsheba sets down her embroidery, her eyes glistening. David releases Solomon and turns to her. They look at each other for a long moment. This king and this queen bound together by trauma and grace in equal measure. "The child we lost," David says quietly, "I never properly mourned him with you. I was so caught up in my own repentance, my own relationship with God, that I didn't think about what it meant for you to lose both Uriah and then your firstborn son." Bathsheba's composure cracks. "I thought you blamed me," she whispers. "For all of it. The temptation, the consequences, the judgment. No." David shakes his head firmly. "I blamed myself. I still do. But you," he reaches for her hand, "you were innocent in this, and I should have said that years ago." They stand together, this fractured family, and something begins to shift, not healing. That's too large a word for wounds this deep, but perhaps the beginning of it. The first acknowledgement that they might survive this together. Nathan watches from the doorway, feeling that same certainty he felt when Solomon was born. This child matters. This family, broken as it is, still carries God's promise. "Solomon," Nathan calls softly. The boy turns. "Come here." Solomon approaches. Nathan places a hand on his shoulder. "Do you know what your name means?" "Peace." The boy answers. "Yes, your father named you for peace because that's what God gave in the midst of judgment. But you're also called Jedediah. Do you remember what that means? Beloved of the Lord." "That's right." Nathan's grip tightens slightly. "And here's what I need you to understand. The sword that has plagued your father's house doesn't have to plague yours. The cycle of violence and consequence can end, but only if you choose differently than those who came before you." Solomon's young face is serious, intent. "How do I do that?" "By learning from your father's failures instead of repeating them, by seeking wisdom instead of just power, by remembering that being beloved of the Lord means living in a way that honors that love." David watches this exchange and something in his expression shifts. Hope, fragile and tentative, but real. The weeks that follow bring a slow, painful reconstruction. David returns to his duties. Though the spark that once defined him is diminished, he governs justly, writes his psalms, leads his people, but the joy is muted, the confidence shaken. He's a king who knows his own capacity for failure. Nathan remains close, a steady presence. They don't speak often about the past. There's nothing left to say that hasn't been said. Instead, they focus on the present, on maintaining the kingdom, on preparing for whatever comes next. One afternoon, Nathan finds David on the palace roof, the same roof where he once stood and saw Bathsheba. The king is looking out over Jerusalem, his face contemplative. "I want to build a temple," David says when Nathan joins him. "A house for the Lord, not a tent, but a permanent dwelling, something that will outlast me. Something good that can come from this mess of a reign." Nathan starts to respond, but before he can, that familiar sensation overtakes him. The presence, the voice, the weight of divine word pressing into his consciousness. He staggers slightly, grips the roof's wall for support. "Nathan," David's concern is immediate. "What is it?" The prophet raises a hand, asking for silence. He closes his eyes, listening, receiving. When he opens them again, his face is conflicted. "God says, no," Nathan reports quietly. "You've shed too much blood. You're a man of war. You cannot build his house." David's face falls, but he nods as if he expected this, as if it's one more consequence, one more way the sword cuts. But Nathan continues, and now his voice strengthens with prophetic certainty. "Your son will build it. Solomon, the man of peace, will build the house of peace, and God will establish his throne forever." David turns sharply. "Forever, forever," Nathan confirms. "The kingdom will pass to Solomon. He will build what you could not. And through him, through his line, God's purposes will continue. The sword came to your house, David, but the promise remains. Both are true." For the first time in months, David smiles. Really smiles. "He'll build the temple," he whispers. "My son, the one born after all the judgment fell. He'll build God's house." Yes. Nathan feels tears on his own cheeks now. Out of the ashes of your failure, God is raising something that will outlast kingdoms. The temple, a throne established forever, a promise that even the sword cannot destroy. David grips Nathan's shoulders. "Thank you," he says fiercely, "for telling me the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. For pronouncing judgment when I deserved it. For staying close even when I've been unbearable." "Thank you," Nathan embraces the king. These two old men who have walked through fire together, I only spoke what I was given, he says. The judgment and the promise both came from the same God. I'm just the messenger. They stand on the roof as the sun sets over Jerusalem, painting the city in gold and crimson. Somewhere below, Solomon studies his scrolls, unaware that his future has just been secured. Somewhere Bathsheba embroiders, finding her own path toward peace. Somewhere the sword still hangs over David's house. There will be more conflict, more pain before the end. But there is also promise, also hope, also the impossible grace of a God who judges sin and redeems sinners in the same breath. Years later, when David is old and failing, Nathan will stand at Solomon's coronation. He'll watch the young king ascend the throne. We'll see the wisdom already evident in his eyes. We'll remember that moment when he held the infant and prophesied blessing. He'll watch Solomon begin to gather materials for the temple, making plans for the house his father longed to build. He'll see how God takes broken pieces and shapes them into something whole. How judgment and mercy, consequence and grace, can coexist in the same story. And he'll understand finally what it means to be a prophet. Not to speak only judgment or only comfort, but to speak truth, whatever truth God gives. To stand in the gap between heaven and earth, and faithfully report what passes between them. To trust that God is big enough to hold both the sword and the promise, both the cost of sin and the miracle of redemption. Nathan's final words to Solomon, whispered at the coronation as he anoints the new king, are simple. Remember who you are, Jediah, beloved of the Lord. Let that truth shape every choice you make. Solomon bows his head, receives the blessing, and rises as king. And Nathan, the prophet, who told the hardest truth and witnessed its terrible fulfillment, steps back into the crowd. His work is done. The story continues without him now, carried forward by this young king who was born in the shadow of judgment and raised in the light of promise. The rich man stole the lamb, the king fell, the son died, the sword came. But so did mercy, so did forgiveness, so did Solomon. Both stories are true, both are necessary, and the collision between them, that unbearable beautiful collision, is where transformation happens. If this story touched something deep in you, if you saw yourself in David's fall or Nathan's courage or Bathsheba's grief, subscribe and turn on the bell. Share this with someone who needs to know that God's justice and mercy aren't opposites. They're the two hands that hold us when we're broken. They're the sword and the promise. And we live in the tension between them. That's where grace does its deepest work. I'll see you in the next story.